Welcome to the GC BizCast, a production of J. Whitney Bunting College of Business at Georgia College and State University. Here we discuss the important topics with business leaders and educators. We produce weekly podcasts from our beautiful campus in Milledgeville, Georgia. We're excited that you've joined us. Our conversation should inform and entertain you. The views expressed are the views of the individuals on the program and do not represent the views of Georgia College and State University. So let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to the GC BizCast. I'm so excited to introduce the special guest of today's episode, CEO of Courageous Leadership, Brooke Deterline. The business school is a huge fan of her TED Talk, which if you haven't already watched, you need to go do that right now. As CEO of Courageous Leadership, Brooke Deterline and her colleagues help boards, executives, and teams develop the understanding and skills to act with ethical courage and ingenuity to address complex and challenging social and organizational issues. Building on her experiences as the founding corporate director for the Heroic Imagination Project, with Phil Zimbardo, she combines social and cognitive psychology and a strategic focus with the passion for equitable, supportive relationships and systems and positive societal impact. Hey Brooke, I'm Sruti. I'm a sophomore at Georgia College and I'm a marketing major.
I'm Maura. I'm a sophomore here at Georgia College and I'm a management major.
And I'm Charlotte Joyner. I'm a sophomore as well, and I'm a marketing major. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Your time is really valuable, and we're all really excited to talk to you. The first thing I did want to ask you is there a philosophical tradition that influenced you and the way you structure your business?
That is such a good question. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted you all are interested. I love that we have a shared interest. Obviously, that's why we're here. So thank you, and for doing the podcast. Do I have a philosophical tradition? No. I'm a big fan of experimentation. So I think I have I have an ethical frame and a feedback loop, knowing that humans are fallible. I'm fallible. That how do I just keep putting checks and balances and trying to do something and then noticing where I'm out of alignment in my values so that we can self-correct, but learn at every step.
Can you kind of describe that ethical frame for us?
Sure. Well, my belief is, in my experience, I worked with Professor Phil Zimbardo for a number of years, who did the Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1972, and working with him and studying a lot of the social psychology, what I took to heart is that we're all capable of profound acts of courage and love and goodness in the world. And we're also highly susceptible doing the wrong thing under social pressure. You probably know, but just because we have a reptilian brain, we have the fight, flight, freeze system, this threat system that kept our ancestors alive. So we all come from very anxious ancestors. Because if we didn't have this highly active survival system, we would have died in a very life and death situation 20,000 years ago. But that system has us act before we can think. So we've all been in a near accident where we moved out of the way and then we're like, what happened? So we can act before we can think, before we can connect to our values and our wisdom and our capacity to care for other people. We've all been in a heated discussion where we say something really hurtful and afterwards we're like, I can't believe we said that. Because when our threat system is running, we can't feel other people. It is simply to keep this body alive. No one else matters. My values don't even matter. I can believe in compassion and equity. If my body's reacting from that place, all it cares about is my survival. That's it. So knowing that and knowing how easy it is for good people to do bad things under pressure, we just, as an organization, and then with all of the organizations we work with, we just normalize it. We normalize it's easy to do the wrong thing. It's easy not to speak up when we think we have something important to say. easy to go along with a boss, even though most of us in the group go, I think this is a terrible idea, because we're afraid to say something. And that fear is not our fault. Our brains and our conditioning are not our fault. So we use a lot of compassion. Our brains and conditioning are not our fault, but we have them, and it is our responsibility. So we make it easy when people make mistakes to say it happens. Okay, now that you've stepped away from it and you've come out of the red zone, is what we call this, our fight, flight, freeze. It's Paul Gilbert's model, who wrote The Compassionate Brain. Once we're out of the red zone, then what do we think is the right thing to do? And we tell people, so often people will say, I did that bad thing and, I can't ever make it up. And it's like, sure you can. You can go to the next meeting and say, I didn't actually agree with that, but I felt a little uneasy, but I want to circle back because I want to say, I actually don't feel okay about that. Like we think we only have one shot at courage. It's almost never true. We can almost always circle back. So that's our main philosophy here. We're all highly susceptible to doing the wrong thing. We all deserve grace. How do we do the right thing? Not if we'll do the right thing, but how will we do the right thing? And then we make it up.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So I know you talked a little about that in your TED Talk, and I know a lot of our viewers have seen your TED Talk. So I was just wondering what groupthink is. That's a little bit of something that you described, and how what you do conquers groupthink.
Sure. Great question. So groupthink is just a fancy way of saying peer pressure. It's not exactly peer pressure, but it's simply when, well, actually, I'll give you my understanding of the biological reason for it. Again, we're talking about the fight, flight, freeze. We're social animals. We want to belong to a group because it signals to our body that we are safe. Human beings don't survive alone, so we're always looking for connection. We're wired for it. So if I'm in a meeting and people are saying one thing, even if I'm not sure about it, but if I look around and everybody is going along, I don't want to be the standout because my body's going to register that as I am not safe. We can learn to override it like, oh, I'm going to feel a little uncomfortable. This is what courage feels like. I'm constantly reminding myself this, but reminding who we work with. I used to think courage was going to feel super strong, like, yes, I'm doing it. And it's like, courage actually feels kind of like a shaky voice and a little bit uncomfortable in my stomach, and doing it anyway. Because there's no courage without fear, and fear feels uncomfortable. It's designed to feel uncomfortable to get us out of harm's way. And oftentimes what that means is it shuts us down from saying what we think is true. So groupthink is simply people looking around. This seems to be what everybody agrees to. Good, I'm going to go agree to that because that feels safe. And so what we advise clients and people in organizations, if you disagree with like a group, like, this doesn't feel right. One of the best things you can do if you have time is to talk to somebody else in the group and say, I felt a little uncomfortable. Did you feel anything? Because you're almost never the only one. So start to see what people will say outside of the group. Because again, in front of the group, it's not going to feel safe. If you have one other person who agrees with you, it's going to help you be courageous when you go back into that group environment. Even better, if you can get two people who agree with you, you're going to have leverage to change the opinions of the people in the group. This came out of the research around conformity at the Ash experiments in the 50s that showed one person standing up is highly honorable, but not particularly effective with groupthink. They can feel good about themselves, but it's not going to change the mind of the group. Two people, again, helps the person be courageous. Three people speaking up at once starts to represent an organizational point of view, and it starts to provide safety. So if I speak up with two other people, if I'm in this group, I'm like, I can go over here and I can still feel safe. So that's how we deal with groupthink.
Like in awe of your passion. It's so cool to hear about. Was this something that was always like on your heart, like business ethics, or was it just something that like you had an experience and that kind of shifted something for you?
Thank you. I do feel lucky that I found something that I love. Like, I feel lucky every day having done this work for a number of years now. I do think I've always believed in the right thing. And before I did this work, I used to be a consultant to public company executives. And what I learned in that work was how easy it was for good people to do the wrong thing, and that they just needed a little support. Like, one of the examples, not the one in the TED Talk, but similar, it was in that same body of work that I was doing. They would hire us. They're like, we believe in values and doing good work in the world. And then, a investor would say, we don't want you to do that. Like, even if it's good for the business, like, it's not going to be good for our investment. So we don't want you to say that, or we don't want you to do that. And I could see them struggle with, well, maybe we just won't say that on it. What do you think? And it's like, oh no, you believe strongly in this. That person has their own needs, but I know how much you care about doing the right thing in this job. So let's go do it. Like, that's all they needed. But if they didn't have someone in their corner with a powerful investor who owned a lot of their stock, it was so easy for that person to make the wrong decision. And so I think seeing that really gave me an understanding of, like, we need more people in our corner. Like, we need to be in our corner. And so when I quit that work and I took a year sabbatical and I bumped into Phil Zimbardo, he was talking about this work. And I was sitting in the audience, and I knew Phil because he and my mom used to work together at Stanford. And I was listening to him talk, and it was one of those, like, click, where I was like, this is it. Like, this is the work I want to do. And so I came up to Phil afterwards. I'm like, I'll do pro bono work for you. And I said, I love what you're doing. Because Phil said in that talk, he said, I taught at Stanford for 50 years and said, taught people about situational influence and how easy it is for us to do the wrong thing. But he said, in all those years of teaching, I never asked, now that you know, what will you do? And he's like, that's why he started the Heroic Imagination Project, the nonprofit that my body of work comes out of. And I was like, hell yes. So that's where it really picked up. 2008 was sort of the whole change of my life.
I think it's a really special thing that you get to be the person that supports them. When you're approaching, like, I guess, like a systematic issue within a company or like within clients, what is like the entry point, I guess you could say, of like starting that? Do you go from the top, or do you start with like workers? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, great question. I think it can be a number of different ways. And for us, it has been that. There have been times that we would have an executive saying, look, we want to have more conversations about equity and race. And, how do we do that? And we've also had it at times where, with a big foundation, they basically said, like, let's all talk about race, because we need to be talking about it. But they didn't give them any, like, a lot of people get high anxiety because they haven't been taught to talk about race. And so putting a lot of people who haven't had a background in talking about racial dynamics, which is often white folks, there's a lot of anxiety, and then they don't go well because, again, we talk about in the red zone, you're kind of contracted and not in alignment with your values. And they had somebody in their division come to us and say, this isn't going well, and we want to give our team more skills of how to handle this. So sometimes it's somebody in the mid range, and we feel like if we can work with enough people inside of an organization, the workers versus the executives or the CEO or the executive director, again, you can create what we refer to as like the bright spot. There's research in terms of positive deviance, where if you can get enough people that are doing it a different way, they can attract more people, because you're kind of like, they look like they're having a good experience over there. Like, what are they doing? And so, yeah, you can sort of Trojan horse it in. You don't have to go to the executives. You can, give the power to the people and let them, move upstream.
So you work with companies that are like super big and also companies that are a little smaller. How does the number of people working for the company affect how you approach the situation?
So good. I wish I could say that I was super systematic in that. So, um, I think when they're larger companies, we just got done working with a tech company that's like tens of thousands of folks. What we try to do up front is say, we want to work with you for a long enough period of time to embed these practices. Because what we do get a lot is companies that are like, we want a workshop and then we're done and we can check the box. And it's like, I wish it worked that way. I wish it worked that way. And, behavioral change, happens over time. And so for larger companies, we did some work with Microsoft. We would do sort of work with a division that was made up of like people from 80 different countries. And the beauty in working with in that kind of a group is it starts to embed it in different areas of the company because they're all from different countries. The piece for us that we try to do, which isn't always possible, is as we talked about, the power of three. Come with your colleagues from a team, but at least come with three people, because you all can then influence the group. One person learning something in a team and bringing it back is not enough to change the dynamics. You need those power of three, or I need a decent sized group inside an organization that can be positively influencing the larger group. It's the most fun, candidly, for me to work at smaller companies, because I think it's easier to change culture and embed it early, so that when new people come in, they already have some good ethical, standards and structure.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure those like bigger companies, it's kind of harder to change the culture because there's more people all, in it together.
Absolutely. And it's reinforcing. But again, if you can just get one division inside of a company that has some ability to create their own culture, if it's a really strong culture in a large company where they're very much, this is the Microsoft way, or this is and it's super strong, it's usually not a client that we'll say yes to, because we don't actually think that's a healthy culture if it's got to be one way, because people have very different expressions of how they want to live and how they want to express their values. Like, who gets to say what's the right way? There is no right way. So we believe in companies that give people a lot more leeway to be themselves.
Awesome.
And then I think Maura had this question too, was, how do we make room for women in such a male dominated workplace? Because I know we're all three business women, aspiring big CEOs over here. And I'm just kind of wondering how we can really radically make space for women in the, like you've done, and in the way that you've done all the work that you have. Is there any advice that you can pass on to us?
Sure. I mean, I can give you advice from my own experience, and yeah, and I wish it were better. I started off in finance, and that was just like wow, this is not where I'm going to live. So, but I do, what I found for myself is I had to build it myself. I had to start my own. Like, there's so much in the larger structure. I think it is changing. I deal with a lot more organizations, especially with the equity and inclusion focus, of really looking at, it is our difference that makes us beautiful. It is what sparks different ways of seeing and being and moving beyond this like dominant culture. It's got to be this way or no way. So I do think there's a lot more understanding that that's where the value comes from. We don't want people with difference coming to the culture and doing it all the same way. And at least in the West, we are so out of balance with the more often, we get the fluidity, but the more sort of stereotype masculine ways of being it's not that it's not helpful, but not in so out of balance. It's the same thing with introversion and extroversion. Most people in leadership roles are these very strong extroverts, and introverts have different skill sets that are really needed. They tend to take longer making decisions. They're more thoughtful. They take a lot more of their own counsel. Like, there's ways that we're just out of balance. So whatever I can do to support you all to become leaders, we need, different types of leadership to show the beauty of the diversity of who we are. So, and start your own if you want to do it fast, because then it's so much easier to build your own culture than to change one.
Yeah, that's an interesting note. I also wanted to kind of have a little follow-up question, because I know you had talked about how, we're stronger together when we're speaking up, and, if two people speak up, a third's more inclined. But how do we have kind of almost like there's intrinsic motivators? How do we have like intrinsic courage? How do we find that within ourselves, especially as women, to really be able to grab the bull by the horns and speak up,
Great question. So I think the easiest way that I found for myself, and in most of the organizations that we work with, is our definition of courage is my ability to act on my values in the face of fear. The other piece I like to remember is I used to think it was giving somebody a piece of my mind, just standing up and saying that thing. And it's not. Courage is giving somebody a piece of my heart in conflict. And that is incredibly hard, because it's way easier to tell somebody off than to say, hey, I'm scared about this, and I think it's really important. Or I'm worried that we're about to move outside of our values in this decision we're going to make, and that scares me. And I think we're better than this, or whatever it is. But remembering our values, if you've got nothing else, you're in a room and you're like, I need to say something. You're like, remember just for a second, like, why does this matter to you? Because even if I don't get the result I want, it's important for me to model a different way. It's important to me to act on my values regardless of the outcome, knowing that social behavior is highly contagious. If I can be courageous, it's going to make it easier for everyone else. So in those moments where you're like, I don't know if I should say that, it's hard to be courageous just for yourself. Remember, it's cueing everyone else in that room that they can speak what's true for them, even if the group is going in another direction. So before you go into challenging situations and challenging meetings, challenging interviews, why does this matter to you? Get really clear on your motivating values, because it's different for all of us, but you'll know it when you hit it. Like, we have people in courageous conversations think right before they go in, and even have a statement they can say to themselves that's aligned with the value that you feel. Like, not because I want to be good, I want to be honest. It's, one of the things, and use the statement that works for you. What I often use if I'm scared and I don't want to do something, but I know underlyingly I do, I say, I am my father's daughter. Like, my dad was incredibly courageous and awesome, and he's gone now. And I'm like, I will act as my father's daughter no matter what. So find that statement that helps you be courageous and practice it before you walk in the door. Because again, when we get scared, it's hard to remember. So if we've said it a few times to ourselves, it's easier to act from it.
Man, that is so good. I really love what you said about the whole introvert extrovert thing. I actually don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about how introverts are important in the business world. So that's really awesome. As someone who's not in the business world yet, but like hopes to be in it one day, do you think that like ethicality in the business world in general is something that's like becoming more of a thing? Do you think it's a little bit niche right now? Like, what does that look like?
Another great question. I don't know if I have enough. I mean, I don't think I can answer that question. So I'll just out myself right now. I don't have enough data to answer that question and feel confident about it. I will say, I do think younger generations care more about values. I mean, I think they did a long time ago. It's interesting, when I did that, when I used to work with public company executives, I remember having lunch with a board member, and he said, you know, Brooke, this whole thing about corporate social responsibility and all that, like when I ran companies, there was no need for corporate social responsibility. We all knew that running a business meant doing good in the world. We treated our employees well. We wanted to treat our community well because it felt good and it was good for business, and it all worked. But it wasn't an add-on. It was intrinsic to what business was. And so I think we went through a period in the 80s and 90s where it's like, just get as much as you can and, you know, forget about people. And I think in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, there's more focus on it, certainly after the bubble in the 2000s and, you know, the Enrons of the world. I think people do value it. And I think younger people are asking more for it. So just go for the companies that are talking about it because it matters to them, and you will be in a values alignment with them. But look for it because not everybody's got it.
And then, Brooke, I wanted to kind of give you some time to talk about the wonderful work that you're doing with your company and just kind of tell us about that.
Thank you. I think the thing that I'm excited about the most right now, you know, in the last 10 years, we've done a lot of focus on equity and inclusion and belonging, which has been such incredibly meaningful work for me, because I feel like this dominant culture is really inhumane to all of us, regardless of where you fall in the, you know, false hierarchy of human value or material privilege. If you have material privilege, you probably lack a lot of systemic awareness. So you might have this privilege, but you're kind of blinded in another way. And if you have a lot of, you know, systemic awareness and, you know, and belonging to a tight group, you may have less material privilege. So there's no one who wins in this system, even the people who think they've won, because all that, you know, they have this money addiction where there's never enough. It's like, who wants to live in that? So there's a way in which I love this work because I feel like it's liberatory for all of us. Like, we're not consumers, we're not workers, like we're humans wanting to have a meaningful life and experience love and give love and be kind. But what we know, or what I really learned working with Phil Zimbardo, is you can put good people in a bad system and have them do bad things. And then if you lock it down with laws and regulations and 400 years of, you know, and so every time we do this work, I see the way, you know, what we refer to as dominant culture, we refer to as the matrix, how the matrix lives in me. Where am I seen in either or I'm more important and they're less important, or it's got to be all this way or nothing, where I'm not holding complexity of the both and. Like, hey, all of our expressions are beautiful. Like, how do we make that work? Like, what comes out of that versus, well, we have to choose, they're the majority, so we're just going to go with that. It's like, why would we do that? And so the work has been so interesting to me, from organizations like the Center for Domestic Peace to Salesforce. It's just inspiring every time we do it. And it's my own. I mean, I do it for myself as well, for my own self-solidarity and liberation, and for collective liberation. The work in the last couple of years, we're doing work with USDN, which is the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is local government officials, like chief sustainability officers, working on making communities more resilient with all of the climate change that's happening, but also making them more equitable. Like, if we're going to change our cities, we're going to change our communities, let's make them resilient structurally and socially. So let's deal with climate change, but then let's also give the power back to the community members And out of local government, it's the community that's going to know more than local government, again, making it of the people versus this top down, way of doing it. So that work's been the most inspiring to me, because it's so meaningful, and I learn a ton from these people, and the tools that we use seem to work really well. And so, yeah, and the people at USDN are so damn fun that it's all like I've died and gone to heaven.
Well, and I feel like what you were just saying about, it's really interesting. You can have a great person and put them in a really bad situation and they're going to act bad. And so I think that's really interesting to note on that, your work with I guess that kind of goes along with your work about self-correcting cultures. And, if you put good people in good situations, or you make a bad situation good, like you say, giving back to communities and stuff, it really does kind of have that starts a new systemic change. And so that's really great that you're able to recognize that and be able to help so many people. You're just fantastic. My gosh. So great to talk to
seriously.
you.
Yes, for sure.
Such a blessing to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And if you have anything else that, any other advice or anything else that you want to share with us, we're obviously totally open-eared over here.
I don't know where I should go with that one. Let's see, what's an easy takeaway? Yeah, I guess the other simple tool that I remember in a stressful situation that helps me be courageous is the courageous mindset. So if I go into a situation and think, oh God, this is going to be a drag, it's a stressful conversation, I don't really want to do it. And if I go in with that worry of this is not good, my body's going to contract and put me in the red zone. I won't be able to access my wisdom. If I simply say to myself, oh, my heart beating, this tension that I feel in my chest and my shoulders, this just means this is just my body telling me this is important to me. And that it's giving me the energy I need to address the situation in front of me. This isn't bad. It's my body telling me it's important. If I simply say that to myself, I don't go into the red zone. My arteries stay open. I can access my compassion, my wisdom, simply in how I think of the situation. It's a study at Harvard called Mind Over Matter, but we use it all the time. Just remind yourself when you feel anxious, this is not a bad thing. It's just my body telling me it's important. It can dramatically change your capacity to meet that situation.
Yes, that's actually something we were talking about right before we started filming. We were talking about how we were talking about how we were a little nervous.
Oh.
So we'll definitely be taking your advice for sure.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.